Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Today we're going to be looking at a really strange and ugly looking Mosin Nagant stock, but this one has some really interesting things to tell us. So we're going to take a closer look at this, and I'm going to show you some of the interesting things about this, and hopefully this will help you better determine what exactly you're looking at the next time you see an old ugly looking Mosin Nagant stock. So this particular stock has kind of an interesting story. It came off of a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine. And as we can see here, it has, well, it has seen better days. There's quite a lot of horrible things going on here. A lot of gouges. The butt plate's missing. It's just not very attractive looking. There's a wrist crack right here. And there's a lot of weird things going on here. Now we'll talk about more about the St. Petersburg cavalry carbines another day, but there was this whole assembly mounted here. That's why we see these weird holes here. Now we're going to start at the back here. And the first thing is we see this plug on both sides. It looks like that's probably a plugged hole. Someone probably originally had a hole through here to put like a sling through. Now, the first thing you should always look at when you're examining an old Mosin Nagant stock is you should check if it has escutcheons, if it has cutouts in the stock here. One of the interesting things we can see here, if I flip this around, there's no escutcheon here, right? This is all just solid, minus this little hole somebody made. And they probably made that because there was no escutcheon, there was no provision in this for a sling swivel. So that's really interesting because that tells us this stock's already rather old. Those escutcheons wouldn't come around until around 1910-ish, sometime after the Russo-Japanese War, before World War I. A lot of the stocks, the earlier ones, did eventually get that. So it's interesting that this one never got those escutcheons and that cutout in the stock so you could put a sling through it. So that's already a really interesting thing about this rifle. Anytime you don't see that, that is extremely interesting. We can see here they added this, which is typical to see with a St. Petersburg cavalry carbine, this weird style sling swivel. You don't ever see this on any other type of Mosin Nagant. This is very strange and very atypical. Okay. So we already know this is kind of an early stock. Now what is this? Well, we know the St. Petersburg cavalry carbines were actually made from cut down rifles or dragoons or Cossacks. So it appears that these stocks were actually cut down M91 stocks. And we know that from this particular model because this doesn't have provisions for that escutcheon. Going all the way back to 1893, even the first dragoon rifles had the cutouts, so they had the escutcheons in here. So we know this has to be an old M91 stock that somebody has done bad things to. Okay, now if we look under here, you should always check under here if you're looking at old stock, because the early Mosin Nagants had a metal finger rest sitting in here, okay? So we don't see that, so we know the stock was made sometime after 1893. Starting in 1894, they would no longer add the finger rest to rifles. And again, we want to look for the finger rest because we know this is an early M91 rifle. The finger rest was only on the M91 rifles. What an ugly stock. Okay, now, getting past all of the ugliness here, there's a couple other interesting things I want to look at. So we can see here, this is a lot of people, and this is one of the things I want to emphasize in this video. A lot of people will look at this and look at it for about 2 seconds before writing it off as just something horrible. However, remember I said this has some really interesting things to tell us? Well, the first thing here is we're going to look at this cleaning rod channel. Okay? Now this cleaning rod channel it's strange because normally we would see it go all the way back in here. Okay, it's weird because it hasn't been cut out yet. If we look here, it's also strange because it's like there's like a step. Right here, there's like a step. Why is there a step there? That's not something we would expect to see. Let's take a look on the inside now. Okay, so here we're looking at the inside of the stock. What we want to do is try to look at where that step was. Okay, notice this. This is really interesting. See this little box here that looks like it was filled in? It's because it was. You see, the earliest M91 rifles had a really short cleaning rod, like something like 15 inches, okay? And for those of you that do your math, typically a Mosin Nagant M91 barrel is much longer than 15 inches. It was kind of a completely useless cleaning rod. So, in 1896, they would actually replace that really old, useless cleaning rod with a much longer one. The way that works is, maybe you've seen this on your Mosin Nagant before. See this thing right here? This is a little metal piece. There's actually, on this side, it's threaded. So when you put the cleaning rod down through the stock, it actually threads into this little metal piece here. Okay? So this would have been added. But what's really interesting, and we can see here, this used to have that metal piece up all the way up here, which is really strange. So what's really cool is if we turn this over, we can see, oh yeah, it corresponds with that step. Because what happened was, originally it threaded into here. So this whole section originally wasn't cut out. It looked like this. It was, it was rounded. So in 1896 or thereafter, whenever this stock was modified, this new channel here was actually cut out. That's why we see a weird step here. Really fascinating. And again, because we have this feature here, we know that this stock was made before 1896. And because we don't have a finger rest, we know this stock was made after 1893. So, even though the stock looks really horrible, we can actually take a closer look at it and determine that this stock was made in either 1894 or 1895 for an M91 rifle. And that's really fascinating. Also, since it's that old, originally it didn't have a recoil lug here. So this would have been added well after the stock was made. These weren't added till around starting 1910-ish, thereabouts. Okay. And that came about because of the Spitzer cartridge, which came around 1909, around there. And I think originally it actually didn't come with the Spitzer cartridge, and then they figured out, because there was no metal lug here, that when you were firing, it would actually come back and start cracking stocks. So then they realized, oh, well, we better go add these. So this would have been added later, but that's neat to see. Now, the other question we need to ask ourselves is, well, who made this stock? If this stock was made in either 1894 or 1895, we have 4 possible makers for this. It could be the Tula Arsenal, the Sistrayetsk Arsenal, the Ijevsk Arsenal, or the Châtellerault Arsenal in France. Now, one of the ways we can identify it is looking behind here, but unfortunately, there's really not a lot here to tell us because it's all gone. Again, something bad happened back here. So we can kind of look under here. One interesting thing is we can see this little proof mark here. What's weird is this is an N. An N is actually not in the Cyrillic alphabet, although we would see the Russians use this, especially the Tula arsenal, around this time to prefix serial numbers. So that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. Looking in here, I would expect to see a P around here if this was a Châtellerault stock. I don't see any indications that this stock was made by the Châtellerault arsenal. And what other thing we can do is kind of look at probability and statistics, right? If we look at the time 1894 to 1895, it is most likely that this was made by the Tula arsenal. And while I don't have 100% confirmation of this yet, some of these markings in here I have to study more. There's one here. There's also a weird, it kind of looks like a Roman numeral right here. Because we don't really know. However, I think it's very safe to assume that this was probably made by the Tula arsenal. Again, between 1894 and 1895. So what's the moral of the story here? Well, one, we learned about an interesting early Mosin Nagant feature. But another one is one man's trash is Big Sam's treasure, maybe? So that might be another one. But the third one, and this is the one I really want y'all to take away, is whenever you see something that looks sort of ratty, don't necessarily discount it. Always take a second look or a closer look at something. Because if you approach something with an open mind, you never know what you might discover. That's how some of the greatest discoveries were made, is something got overlooked by everyone until someone came along with an open mind and said, that's interesting, I'm going to give that a closer look. And voila, we learned something today. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed taking a closer look at this really horrible old St. Petersburg cavalry stock with me. In our next video, kind of going along with these topics that we'll be doing, we're actually going to be looking at a stock even older than this one. So you don't want to miss that. That's got some interesting things to tell us as well. So if you guys are interested in this kind of Mosin Nagant content, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps out. I really appreciate y'all watching this. Please let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and I'll see you next time.